So there's a particular question that people love to ask, right? And the question is, should I buy this property under a trust? Should I rather keep it under my personal capacity? Well, in general terms, there's a few things that you just need to consider before you make this decision. But one thing that you have to understand is that circumstances differ with different people, right? So it might actually require you to go sit down with your own practitioner so that, you could get tailor-made advice and then make a decision from there because circumstances will not be the same. And another thing that you just want to be mindful of is that this actually differs, or this decision of yours will depend on the type of property that you're buying. Are you buying it to make use of it in the form of a business? Are you going to rent it out? You want to flip it? Or alternatively, do you want to, just maintain it as a home? What's the plan? So that will also influence the kind of decision that you get. But in general terms, I'm just going to run you through some of the things that you just want to think about when you're going to make this decision. Right. So for those that are new here, my name is Yolanda Mnyengeza. I'm an attorney and a director at a law firm here in Johannesburg, South Africa. So we mainly specialize in estate planning and trust. So let's get into this. So we're going to start first about having a property in your personal capacity. What does that look like? What are the implications currently and your future implications should you make this type of decision? So first things first, if you now purchase this property in your personal name, right? What is this going to look like? Remember, now you're purchasing the property so that it's going to be in your personal name. So what this means in actual fact is that it's now increasing your value. It's increasing your estate value, so to speak. Right? So, which means that if this property is the only thing and it's above 250 rand or 50,000 rand, it means that when something happens to you, you pass away, your estate will have to be administered, right? Alongside with anything that you may have. So that is the first thing that you need to understand. Also, when you have a property in your personal name, it means that if for whatever reason you owe people, right? Whether because you owe them, because you took out a debt, or for whatever reason, it means that now the property, because it's yours, it may be susceptible to being executed, so to speak, right? In case you cannot pay, because now it belongs to you entirely. So that's the second thing. And the other thing that you just want to note with regards to the administration aspect that I was talking about. Remember, because it's in your personal name, it means that now it's counted as part of your estate. So then it increases the estate value that you have, meaning that you'll have to, or your estate will have to go through an administration, right? And in American terms, it's called probate court. Right. Now, what is the disadvantage about probate court or administration? It is the fact that it does take a bit of time before properties can be easily or transferred to the beneficiaries, right? So in the meantime, this process has to take place. It can take anything from 6 months to 9 months, sometimes to 2 years, right? Depending on what is happening and what's influencing, the process of administration. So in that instance, it will mean that it doesn't really get registered as soon as possible in the names of your families. In addition to this, because it was in your personal name now, it now has to be further transferred to the names of the people who are inheriting it. Because now there must be a change of ownership, because now other people are inheriting it. You are not there anymore. So it has to be in the names of those getting it, which means what? Which means additional transfer costs, right? That have to now be paid so that the property is registered in the rightful owner's name, which is any beneficiary that's benefiting from this property. So, which means that as a person who is leaving these things, you have to now make a plan, put these finances aside, so all of these things at least can be catered for. Because remember, if these things can't be paid for, administration, debts, etc., at your death, it means that some of the properties end up being sold because of this. Then, something else to just think about. When you have a property in your personal name, remember what I said? I said it increases your worth. It increases your estate value, right? So if you have a very expensive property or a property that actually increases your worth, your estate value to above 3.5 million rand, you know what to expect, right? It's that estate duty tax. Why? Because you're going through an administration process, which means that part of the things that now you have to pay in terms of costs will have to be estate duty tax. So do you see what then is the implication of having this property in your personal name? And then lastly, one of the things that you just want to be mindful of, right, is that if you're going to convert this and use it as, let's say, a rental property, this in actual fact you need to really get advice on, because once you then use it as a rental property where you start getting income, you have to now assess in terms of the tax bracket, how is it actually increasing my income tax? Because eventually, SARS will come knocking because you're utilizing this as a rental property. So you must just be careful, because that will then determine how much tax must be paid to SARS if this property was utilized in that manner. So these are some of the things that you just want to be mindful of if you're going to buy it in your personal capacity. But essentially, this is now when we're talking about a property that you want for your personal ownership, not for business purposes. So that's just something to note. And then let's go to purchasing it under a trust. What would this look like? Purchasing a property for personal ownership, not for business purposes. What does this look like? Obviously, the first thing you need to think about is, how are you buying this property? Because in most instances, the trust won't have money, right? So that's the first thing that you're going to have to figure out. Once that is threshed out of the way, you will obviously have to pay transfer costs just like any other sale. And then the property will vest in the trust. Now, as much as there is an expense of 45% in terms of tax when it comes to trusts, if this property is not necessarily used as a way of making income, it doesn't necessarily mean that you'll have to be paying, the tax or the income tax pertaining to the trust, because this property is not necessarily generating any income, right? Which is why I say that you need to understand, why are you moving this property here? What are you going to use it for? So that you can understand what the implications will be and whether or not it's a good idea to have it under the trust. But for personal use, let's say you just want it for your family, then you will know that once it's moved there, it's going to stay there. It's not necessarily just going to trigger tax unless you start using it as a business property. Now, another thing to note, once you have it under a trust, if something happens to you, remember it's not under your personal name now, it's under the trust. So if something happens to you, number one, there aren't any administration costs because there's not going to be anything to administer in the first place. This property, if it's worth a lot, it will just remain as it has, and the people that have to benefit will just benefit, right? Even if it's above 3.5 million, it's 5 million rand, it's not going to make a difference, right? There's not going to be a need to go through an administration because your estate, you would have made sure, is under 250,000 rand. But even if, let's say, your estate is above 250,000 rand, this property is not going to be there to also increase the value, right? Because that also speaks to what? It speaks to the estate duty aspect. Because if you had left it in your personal name and this property increased the value or your worth, and it went above 3.5 million, it was going to be problematic. But now, even if this property is 6 million, 10 million sitting under a trust, your estate won't have to pay estate duty because this property no longer belonged to you. It was now under a trust. It just continues to benefit other people. Do you see the difference? All right. Again, another thing that I even forgot to talk about or mention when it comes to buying a property under you and you passing away is the issue of capital gains tax. Now, what is capital gains tax? Just in simple terms, this is a tax that is applicable when you sell a property. Right. So when you sell a property, and then it makes a profit, then SARS will also want to get some money from the tax, or is going to tax, the sale so that it can get some money from the gain that was made from the property. If this property is in your personal name, because you pass away, it is regarded as a disposal. Although this property is not being sold, you just died. But because it's changing ownership from one person to another, it is regarded as a disposal, which means what? There's a trigger of capital gains tax because the property is moving from different owners now. All right. Then what does it look like in the form of a trust? Now, if it's in the context of a trust, there isn't any capital gains tax that will be triggered when you die, simply because there's not going to be a change of ownership. You have already moved the property, or it was bought under the trust already, right? So there's not going to be a change of ownership because it remains under a trust. Even your death does not affect or trigger capital gains tax because you didn't own it anymore. You were benefiting. So this then does not apply when this property is under what? Under the trust. And then the other thing to note as well is the fact that obviously because, this property was not owned by you, there's no administration that is going to be applicable. There's no further transfer costs that are needed, unlike with a property that was in your name, which needed, transfer costs. In this instance, it's under a trust, remains under a trust. You are benefiting, you've passed away. Now the trust says the kids must benefit. The kids don't have to do anything. They just benefit from the trust. They just start staying there if they want to, right? They don't need to pay any transfer costs. They don't need to wait for administration or probate court to complete before, anything can happen. Things will still go on as they have been. It will be like they just substituted you with your kids. No need for any paperwork, transactions, and all of that. Things just go on as if you are still alive. So these are the two main differences when you buy a property under a trust and you place a property in your personal capacity. So, like I said, again, this is generic information. One of the things you have to just consider is the fact that what type of property are you buying? What's the purpose of you buying this property? What's your plan about this property? Future plan, that is. All of these things need to be considered. You need to have everything lie on the table and get, proper guidance, and then you make your decision. But that's just in a nutshell what these two different types of sales look like. Right. So just to reiterate, my name is Yolanda Mnyengeza. I'm an attorney, the director at a law firm here in Johannesburg. We will see you next time when we have something else to talk about. Bye.